Godzilla is easily the most recognizable monster in all the 20th century. He's big, he's mean, and he's been downplaying the severity of radioactive fallout for millions of children everywhere. Children including those that would grow up to become game developers. So I ask you, YouTube audience watcher, why on earth has there not been a good Godzilla game yet? It just doesn't make sense. Like, Godzilla was making a roaring comeback right as console gaming was finally becoming a thing that everybody could get a hold of. You know what, it's just gonna be easier for me to show you guys than whine. So let's take a trip down memory lanes of consoles past that we're probably gonna wanna immediately blot out of our minds through the application of unsafe amounts of alcohol and blunt force head trauma. So let's hit up that bottle shop and set the scene. The year is 1989. The great gaming market crash in 1983, as well as the home computer systems that contributed to it, are long behind us, and the era of dedicated console gaming is in full swing. And hot diggity, does it look good! You got your Mario, your Duck Hunt, your Legend of Zelda, and your Godzilla Monster of Monsters. The incredibly slow and uninteresting intro cutscene for the game tells us that, yet again, aliens have invaded Earth trying to take all our stuff, so the governments of the world banded together to sick Godzilla and Mothra on the invading aliens. Because that's what they do every time. You start out on a sort of asymmetrical hexagon map with Godzilla and Mothra at your control, which you can move about. And they say stage 1 is Earth, but if this is Earth, what the hell is that? You have to go through one of these stages, which are all near identical to each other aside from some different tile sets, every time you move. Eventually though, you'll come into contact with the first stage bosses, which are a Showa series Mogira and Hentai. Tentacle Boy tends to rush right into it, and if you've got Mothra anywhere near him, you'll kick his teeth in, even though he probably has some sort of squid beak thing. Mogira will get a good look at this and immediately run off to the next stage, which will leave you confused, as I personally was not able to figure out how on earth I moved to the next stage, even though I trampled all of the stuff on the other side. Admittedly, I wasn't too excited to figure out how on earth I advanced, because the game plays like it was meant only for Mothra and Godzilla was kind of thrown in, and Mothra will frequently get stun locked by anything, as a single hit will send Mothra hurtling to the bottom left of the screen, whether or not there's any physical objects in her way. 2 years later, we got Godzilla 2, War of the Monsters, which now, like the Heisei era, the monsters are the bad guys again, and it's unique. Sorta. You play as the Japanese or Global Defense Military, I really couldn't pay attention to who it actually was, and you play on a cityscapes tile set that pits you and your military against whatever monsters are coming out at you. You gotta pay attention to your little advisor buddies whenever you click on a non-occupied tile that'll tell you important stuff like you can one-shot Godzilla if you build an oxygen destroyer and lure him out to water, or if you don't build a radar array at the factory, you will never be able to kill Baragon because he'll just keep burrowing indefinitely and healing just enough to survive another round of punishment from your military. You move your little guys one at a time to go and fight the monsters that will almost certainly one-shot them, as even after reading a PDF of the manual, I have no idea how this slot machine mechanic works when you fight guys. But don't worry, you can build more tanks and stuff at these factories, military bases, airstrips. Hold up. Hold up! This is Advance Wars! This is some kind of precursor to the Advance War games for the Game Boy Advance! Holy crap! I couldn't find any mutual developers between Intelligent Systems and whoever put out this game, because even in the manual, the box, or any part of the Godzilla 2 game, there is no accreditation to any developers, or even a game studio. It just says Toho. Nonetheless, the similarities are extremely interesting and makes you wonder if this game had any influence on the Advance Wars series or anyone in Intelligent Systems. So the Super Nintendo comes around, and with it comes better graphics, sound, game handling, and just an all-around great experience compared to the already good Nintendo Entertainment System. Surely there'd be a good Godzilla game on this console. In fact, I bet you're thinking of one right now that might be fun. Oh, my sweet summer child, how wrong you are. Super Godzilla, a game fondly reminisced about by some of my older friends, but by God, it sucks! It's just, I appreciate that they're trying to create like a unique experience pertaining to Godzilla, but the game is an absolute slog to get through no matter how you're playing it. So the premise of this game is, oh surprise, surprise, aliens are here again and they want to take our stuff, so let's go sick Godzilla on them because we have a contrived way of loosely controlling him. And then you go to this screen. Yep, you're that blue dot there, that is Godzilla. You get this fun little like screen on the top that kind of makes you think maybe this would have been a better game like 10 years or so later, maybe 20 years. I forget when the DS came out, like on the Nintendo DS. And you pretty much just watch your little blue dot move around the city. And yep, that's Godzilla. Look at the animation on the top. And you pretty much have to avoid everything. Like, yeah, buildings, like smashing buildings, that's gonna hurt you. Being anywhere near a tank that you can or cannot see, that's gonna hurt you. Those will hurt you too. I know they say they heal you, but they're probably gonna hurt you anyway, somewhere down the line. And then we get to the actual kaiju showdown. So, kaiju fights in this game go by, you have something called fighting spirit. The closer you get to the right side of the screen, the more fighting spirit you have, and then if you successfully execute a basic attack, you can move back a bit and perform a special attack, like Godzilla's classic atomic fire, a tail whip, or something like that. Oh, and by the way, the AI is completely cheating. They get to ignore all these rules, like they don't have to be anywhere near the opposite side of their screen for them to get full fighting spirit or whatever. They don't need to do anything, and they pretty much can like hit you from wherever. Yeah, you thought that anything before the year 1996 would play fair. Well, you thought wrong. Overall, the gameplay's pacing is like tree sap, and the flow is non-existent. Most of the time while playing this game, I just sit there looking through articles on my phone and eventually furiously mashing the directional buttons when it finally came time to turn Godzilla and hoping the game didn't drop my inputs and I didn't end up losing half my HP by smashing through a city sector. Oh, and full disclosure, I didn't actually make it through the first 2/3 of the game that I needed to get through in order to play as the namesake Super Godzilla. But as you can see here, it's kind of just boosted stats, new moveset that is very similar to the original moveset. And if you're wondering why he kind of looks like a decrystallized Space Godzilla, you're onto something. As the screenwriter for Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla also made this game a year previously. By the way, while I enjoyed Space Godzilla as a kid, I also have to take into an account that the original music composer for the Godzilla series since 1954 took one look at Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla's script and walked off the project. Now, before you clench your teeth and brace yourselves for the 1998 embarrassment to the series made by Roland Emmerich and TriStar, we're gonna use the loophole here that because Toho has in multiple movies declared the 1998 Godzilla to A, not be a Godzilla, and B, aside from one scene in Final Wars where technically that wasn't even the 1998 Godzilla, it is not really considered canon. Not exactly the strongest reasoning, as Godzilla is probably one of the most overly retconned and screwy series of continuities in all of cinema, and it also doesn't help that a lot of these so-called games are just cheap LCD shovelwares designed to be promotional material for the movie in the first place. They're not really serious games. You know what was a serious Godzilla game though? Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee for the GameCube and eventually the Xbox. This one knew what it needed to be. It was just you, as your favorite monster, beating the crap out of other monsters. We don't care about story, we don't care about minigames. Hell, in the opening monologue, the alien guy who's attacking you seems that he's just here because he has to do some sort of community service, like monologuing to the indigenous peoples.
Am I still on? Oh. Well, we now return you to whatever it was you were doing. Idiots.
Destroy All Monsters Melee was by no means perfect, but it got all the ideas you needed for a foundation for a great Godzilla game. Rather than wade around a city slowly, you could rip an office building out of its foundation, hurl it 2 miles across New York City, right into Gigan's face. And then when you were done with that, you could knock Ghidorah on his tail, and then power wash him with radiation. That is all you needed in a Godzilla game. You didn't need story or any of that. You just needed to be able to hurt 50-meter tall monsters. Destroy All Monsters Melee had its fair share of problems, particularly that some monsters were definitely over and underpowered, which made unlocking all of them by playing through the campaign over and over again kind of a pain. And you also didn't really have any way to follow monsters with your beam accurately, and you just had to sort of cross your fingers and hope that the path you knocked the monster in would be easy enough to follow with the GameCube's awkward little C-stick. A year later, the game got ported to the OG Xbox, and it featured Kiryu, also known as Mechagodzilla 3, but aside from that, it was more of the same. 2 years later, the guys behind Destroy All Monsters Melee, Pipeworks Software, followed it up with Godzilla Save the Earth. You got more monsters in this game, and it was also a lot easier to unlock the monsters you wanted rather than having to slog through like half the roster to get the one you want. The monsters' types, strengths, and weaknesses were all clearly defined, so there was no more of this BS overpowering. You actually had an idea of what was going wrong and what you could do to beat this monster. And between the updated visuals, now that the game was on the PS2 and Xbox rather than the GameCube, plus some tighter combat, it just overall felt like a good step forward. Yeah, there were those god-awful minigames you had to play about twice per every campaign playthrough, but you could just easily fail those on purpose and get on with your life. So based off the improvement between this game and Destroy All Monsters, by the third game they'll probably have a great Godzilla title, right? Well, guess what? Fuck you, the next one's a Wii game. Enter Godzilla Unleashed for the PlayStation 2 and Wii. While this is very obviously designed to be a Wii game heavily utilizing the motion controls, oddly enough it came out 15 days previously on the PlayStation 2. The Wii version was very much intended, heavy air quotes there, to be the superior one of the two console versions. It had a larger monster roster, improved graphics, and completely incoherent controls that made the game an absolute chore to use. Some of the series' staple features, such as rage moves and calling in airstrikes, were taken out in favor of more watered-down, boring features, such as surge moves that are elaborate to get and not very helpful to have. And then instead of having the calldowns, you just had various faction aircraft that would either help you or try to harm you, depending on what roster you picked your monster from. To the game's credit though, it did have a dynamic and even coherent storyline. You were either one of 4 subgroups of monsters, either being Earth's heroes like Godzilla and Mothra, the GDF, which is pretty much all the robots in the game, the aliens, people like Ghidorah, Gigan, and Megalon, and finally, the mutant faction, a group of monsters led by Space Godzilla that have their own plans for Earth as opposed to the Vortak and everyone else. While the Wii version is a complete mess, the PlayStation 2 version pretty much plays like a slightly updated but not exactly better version of Save the Earth. Most of the time in the campaign, you're just plopped down in a particular location, a couple monsters are already going at it, and then you get to choose if you want to help out one of the monsters to defeat the other or complete some other objective, which vary from destroying buildings to advance the plot of the mutants, or taking out certain monsters of certain factions to weaken said faction, or destroying the crystals to relinquish control of one of the monsters. I find that a lot of the non-beat-up monster routes are just completely unsatisfying. You just run around for about 45 seconds, breaking all the crystals, match over. No points awarded, you technically completed the objective, so you're moving on to the next one. It just sucks. The PlayStation 2 version, which is easily the one that you're actually able to play and not have to stand in the middle of your room awkwardly playing charades hoping Godzilla does what you want him to, has a lot of vestigial features that feel like they're just leftovers from the Wii that they couldn't find out how to properly remove and still make the game one piece. Which is especially odd considering that the PlayStation 2 version of Godzilla Unleashed feels like an updated form of Godzilla Save the Earth. Why do we need this hokey chase cam? Why can't we have the other features in Unleashed, like say the cool version of Gigan or that other model of King Ghidorah, which, now that we bring that up, I don't have any corroborated, concrete proof, but it really feels like something went wrong behind the scenes here, as a lot of the game's separate models feel like they could just have been recycled, whereas other game models like Kiryu give off a really strong vibe that they were just copied and pasted over from Godzilla Save the Earth. Whatever really happened, the end result was a complete mess that wasn't very fun to play compared to its predecessors. There's one final game we're going to cover here today, and I bet you all know what it is, and some of you might even have a sour taste in your mouth from it still. The unsubtitled Godzilla for the PS4. As a foreword for this particular part of the video, you're not going to see any gameplay, one, because I don't feel like it's right to appropriate other people's content, and two, I don't feel like dropping all that money on a nice capture card of PlayStation 4 and this disappointment of a game just to show you what's up. Especially when there are many other ways that I can demonstrate just how disappointing this is without B-roll. There was a lot of hype riding behind this game, and a lot of people were excited that this was going to be the finally good Godzilla game. Pipeworks Studios no longer had the reins as they were off doing other things, like creating a Cards Against Humanity ripoff, and Bandai Namco, who had done an okay job making action figures, was going to take a crack at it. This game falls flat on its face despite updated graphics and a pretty good roster of monsters to choose from. The kaiju of your choice moves in a slow, ponderous fashion, the objectives feel stupid and contrived, and it just doesn't help one bit that there's many occasions when you're playing this game where it just feels like you're controlling a guy in a rubber suit as opposed to a giant monster. And that's a real deal breaker. And it doesn't help that all the while you're playing the game, you're surrounded by so many examples of corner cutting. Like how some of the buildings don't actually get destroyed. They just swap out the building model for some crumbled rubble between those flashes after you attack them. This isn't true for all the buildings, but it's true for enough of them that you notice it quite a bit. You can't help but notice the entire cityscape is almost sterile. There's no abandoned cars, there's no signs of human life about. It's almost as if it's just a pristine environment for the monsters to just show up and wreck shit, and it isn't actually a city being attacked. I know these are nitpicky, but it gets to you after a bit. So are we ever gonna get a good Godzilla game? Well, I honestly can't tell you. It is hopeful that the new Godzilla movie brought in a ton of cash and acclaim and will likely spur on the producers to make more Godzilla movies. And with more Godzilla movies, we get more monsters, and who knows, eventually there might be enough interest so that we can get a new developer taking a crack at the Godzilla franchise. There's also a handful of Godzilla games that I didn't cover here in depth because I just didn't have the time in this video. For example, Godzilla Kaiju Daikessen, a Japan exclusive for the SNES, was a simple fighting game that had some pretty interesting title slates, very similar to the Godzilla Heisei series, but was otherwise not very noteworthy. And then there was the Godzilla Generations and the sequel for the Sega Dreamcast, which while was extremely interesting, I just couldn't find a way to properly get an emulator to work. Which is a huge bummer for me because that's a game where you can play as a gigantic Dr. Serizawa and shoot lightning out of your eye patch. Oh well. Until next time, everyone.